The lonely CEO sat alone in the Grand Hotel lobby until a little girl walked up and said, "You look like you need a friend. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below." The lobby was almost too quiet that night. Marble floors shimmered under golden light, the kind that makes everything look perfect, even when it isn't. A faint tune drifted from the hotel bar, piano keys pressed by tired fingers. And in the far corner, away from the laughter and clinking glasses, he sat. Elias Ward, 43 years old, CEO of Ward Enterprises, a name people whisper with respect, sometimes with envy. He wore success like a second skin, but if you look close enough, you'd see the cracks. 3 days ago, his world burned down, literally. The company's newest project, the one designed by his younger brother, went up in flames. An electrical fire, they said, but what the headlines didn't say was that Elias hadn't spoken to his brother in months, not since their last argument, the one where pride spoke louder than love. Now, the same man who built skyscrapers sat alone in a hotel lobby he didn't own, a glass of whiskey sweating beside him, untouched. He wasn't really drinking, just holding on to something solid, because everything else felt like smoke. He watched people pass through the revolving doors. Families, couples, laughter echoing against marble. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere, except him. He was just waiting for what he didn't know. If anyone had looked his way, they have seen what money can't disguise, a man who's lost everything that ever mattered. But no one looked. Not yet. Elias was staring at the marble floor when he noticed her, a little girl, no more than 4, standing near the lobby fountain. Her hair was a messy golden halo around her small face, and her dress swirled in soft pastel colors that somehow made the cold marble seem warmer. She looked around, uncertainty in her wide eyes, then took a careful step toward him. "You look like you need a friend," she said. The words were so simple, so pure, that Elias blinked. No one had said something like that to him, not in weeks, maybe months. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The girl tilted her head slightly. "Are you okay?" Elias managed a faint laugh, part surprised, part weary. He looked down at the polished floor and then back at her. I don't know," he admitted softly. Her little brows furrowed, and she shook her head. "You don't look okay." Her voice wasn't loud or demanding. It was calm, honest, as if she had been observing the sadness hiding behind the tailored suit and shiny shoes. "My mom says when people don't talk, they're sad inside," she added. Elias cleared his throat and let a small smile slip through. "Your mom sounds very wise." "She makes cookies," Lila said matter-of-factly. "Cookies help everything." Elias let out a small laugh, more genuine this time. He nodded. "I'll remember that." A soft voice called from the side. "Lila, sweetheart, come on." The girl looked over her shoulder, but didn't forget him. "You should have a cookie," she said quietly. "It'll help." And just like that, she was gone, skipping back to her mother. Clara Bennett, young and elegant with golden hair pulled into a loose bun, crouched down to whisper to her daughter before glancing at Elias. Her eyes were soft, apologetic. He nodded slightly, letting her know it was okay. She gave a small, uncertain smile and went back to her path. Elias turned his gaze back to the lobby. The fountain splashed gently, the golden light reflecting in tiny ripples. He looked down at his untouched glass of whiskey and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a trace of warmth, a small flicker of connection. No one knew who he was. No one cared about his title. They just saw a man alone, and a little girl asked the one question that had been missing in his life. He let out a breath, not the calculated sigh of a CEO planning his next move, a quiet, unguarded exhale of a man who had been seen. And for the first time in weeks, a small part of him felt lighter. The little girl tugged at her mother's hand as they walked toward the hotel lounge. Her eyes flicked back at Elias one more time, concern still etched on her small face. Clara Bennett, young with golden hair pulled into a loose bun, gave him a small, uncertain smile. "Sorry about that," she said softly. "She doesn't usually talk to strangers." Elias shook his head, keeping his voice quiet and steady. "It's all right," he said. She hesitated, standing there, unsure if she should say more. There was something about him, something beyond the suit and the calm composure, the weight in his eyes, the quiet sadness. It caught her off guard. Her daughter settled into a nearby armchair, showing her drawings and chatting in bursts of excited words that made Clara smile faintly. Elias watched quietly, his attention gentle, never imposing. Then, Clara walked past him to refill a glass of water, and he noticed the small details, the way she moved, tired but careful, the soft, worry lines on her face. It wasn't charm or beauty that struck him. It was honesty, the quiet strength in her presence. When she bent down to check on Lila, Elias slipped out of his seat and moved closer. He didn't speak. He just handed her a small, clean napkin and a glass of water. She looked up, startled. Thank you, Clara said softly, unsure of how much to reveal. He just nodded. You don't have to be strong all the time, he said quietly. Not here, not with me. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly, and for a moment, the world outside the hotel, the stress, the fear, the responsibility, seemed to fade. They were two people shaped by loss, by struggles too heavy to carry alone. And in that quiet space, something shifted. She didn't need him to fix anything. He didn't need to lead or instruct. He just stayed. And in the stillness, Clara realized maybe she didn't have to be alone anymore. Later, when Lila ran off to explore again, Elias returned to his seat. Clara watched him for a moment, noting the small acts, the napkin, the water, the way he had quietly been there without demanding recognition. Something fragile and new was beginning to grow, unspoken, unforced. It was trust, and it started with a little girl who simply asked if he was okay. After that first evening, Elias returned to the hotel lobby the next morning. And the morning after that, he didn't say much. He didn't need to. He ordered the same black coffee each time, took the same corner seat, and watched. Lila would wave at him every time she saw him, like they had been friends for years instead of minutes. Sometimes, she brought little drawings, scribbled suns, smiling cats, and stick figures with big hearts. Always signed, for Mr. Friend. Elias never corrected her. He carefully folded each one and tucked it into his wallet, keeping them close, more important than any contract or business card. Clara watched quietly at first. She remained polite, distant, never letting him cross a boundary. But over time, she began to notice the small things. The way Elias would quietly move a chair to give her space when she was juggling trays and Lila tugging at her sleeve. The way he let her pass without comment when she was busy with hotel duties. Small gestures unnoticed by anyone else, but meaningful in ways that words could never capture. One rainy Thursday, the lobby was quieter than usual. Clara had stepped away to handle a delivery, leaving Lila playing near the fountain, twirling in her little dress. Suddenly, a sharp cry broke the soft murmur of the lobby. Elias was already on his feet. Lila had slipped on the wet marble, hands scraped, dress damp and spotted. He knelt beside her immediately, calm, careful, the very image of steadiness. From his wallet, he produced a small gold star sticker, holding it out to her. Only the bravest kids get this, he said softly. Crying is okay, but brave ones always get back up. Lila sniffled, looking at him solemnly, and then carefully pressed a sticker to her shirt. She wrapped her tiny arms around his neck without hesitation, trusting him completely. Clara appeared at the edge of the lobby, holding a box from the bakery, her eyes taking in the scene. Her daughter safe, her hand resting in the quiet comfort of a man she barely knew but already trusted. Elias didn't notice her at first. All his attention was on Lila, on that simple act of offering comfort and courage. When he finally looked up, his eyes met Clara's. No words were necessary. She understood. It wasn't about wealth or status. It wasn't about being a CEO or a stranger with a fancy suit. It was about presence, about being there when it mattered most. Later, as the lobby returned to its usual rhythm, footsteps echoing, murmurs of conversation, the hum of elevators, Elias sat back at his corner seat. Clara watched him across the room as he quietly returned to his coffee. And somewhere between the small gestures, the stolen smiles, and Lila's laughter, a subtle shift had begun. Something unspoken, but undeniable, was growing between them. Trust, comfort, connection. And it started with a little girl who simply said, "You look like you need a friend." Over the next few weeks, the quiet routine between Elias, Clara, and Lila began to take shape. Elias arrived at the hotel lobby in the early mornings, just as Clara was opening the doors, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Other times, he showed up late in the afternoon when Lila was coloring napkins and leaving little trails of crayon on her sleeves. But always, he chose the same corner seat, close enough to hear Lila's laughter, but far enough to remain unobtrusive. Clara began to notice the small, thoughtful gestures. The way Elias would refill a forgotten cup of water without asking. The way he remembered which cookie Lila preferred. The ginger honey swirl she always reached for. No one had told him. He hadn't asked. He just knew. And in those quiet moments, Clara realized that his attention wasn't about wealth or charm or trying to impress. It was about noticing, about caring subtly, intentionally. One evening, the lobby was quiet. Lila tucked into a corner seat with a blanket and a picture book. The soft hum of the elevators, the distant murmur of staff cleaning. It all wrapped around them like a cocoon. Elias spoke softly to Clara. "My mother, she used to ask me a question," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Even after I became so, she'd still ask, 'Are you happy?'" Clara paused, her hand stilling on the counter. She looked up at him, unsure what to say, but her silence was enough. She didn't need to answer. The weight in his voice carried everything unsaid. Days later, another quiet evening. Lila had fallen asleep, head resting on the corner of her chair, her storybook open but forgotten. The radio played soft jazz in the background. Clara glanced at her daughter, then at Elias, who was seated across from her, still in his corner seat, calm and steady. She said it quietly, almost to herself. "I almost gave her up," she admitted. Elias turned slightly, listening, giving her space. Clara continued, "Not forever, just for a while. When I found out I was pregnant, my fiancé, he walked out. I was 23, broke, working double shifts. I kept thinking maybe she deserved more. 2 parents, stability, someone better than me. But the moment I saw her, I knew I could give up everything except her." Her voice was steady, her eyes glinting with the weight of truth. "I don't hate him," she added softly. "I just hate that she'll never know what it's like to have 2 parents who stayed." A long silence followed. Elias didn't rush. He didn't try to solve or fix. He simply said quietly, "She has more than most. She has you." And in that moment, Clara realized something vital. This wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about who was missing. It was about who stayed. The small, quiet moments had begun to form a bridge between them, one built on trust, understanding, and shared care. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt something softening in her chest, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. It was hope. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Clara noticed something was wrong. Lila had been unusually quiet all morning, curled up in the corner of the lounge with her storybook. Her cheeks flushed a soft pink, and when Clara touched her forehead, the heat made her heart leap. "Oh no," she whispered, panic rising. The lobby was understaffed. She couldn't leave Lila alone, but she needed urgent care. Before she could voice her worry, Elias was already on his feet. His eyes had found hers across the room, quiet, steady, understanding. "I'll take you," he said, voice calm, unwavering. Clara shook her head. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. "Let me drive you. I'll get her to the doctor safely." Minutes later, they were in his car. The scent of leather and pine filled the air, blending with the soft patter of rain on the windows. Clara cradled Lila in the back seat, murmuring words of comfort, brushing damp bangs from her forehead. Elias drove with careful hands, glancing at the rearview mirror every few seconds. Halfway through the ride, Lila stirred, blinking groggily. She mumbled, "You're my favorite grown-up." Elias' eyes widened in the mirror. His mouth opened slightly, as if unsure how to respond. Clara's chest tightened as she watched him, quiet and unpolished. Not the flawless hero anyone else saw. Just a man with gentle instincts, careful hands, and a heart that had learned how to be soft again. He didn't laugh or deflect. He simply said softly, "That's a pretty big title, Lila." The little girl nodded, clutching her mother's arm. "You give cookies and stars, and you help my mommy." Clara blinked hard, trying to hold back tears. She looked at Elias, and something shifted in her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She wasn't afraid of him. And slowly, she realized she was beginning to fall. The rain continued to tap softly against the car, a quiet rhythm that mirrored the new, fragile trust forming between them. And in that stillness, Clara understood something she hadn't before. Sometimes the people who help you most aren't the ones who promise to fix everything. They're the ones who simply stay, quietly, without expectation. And Elias was staying. The calm they had built began to tremble. One morning, Clara found a thick envelope slipped under her apartment door, stamped with a law firm's logo. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Inside were papers, a formal petition for custody, from the father who had once walked out without a backward glance. Callan Price, the same man who had whispered promises of forever and vanished when forever became inconvenient. Now, years later, he returned, cold and unyielding, his words wrapped in legal threats. Clara sank into her kitchen chair. Lila asleep in the next room, safe in a world of pink blankets and bedtime stories, unaware of the storm just beyond the door. Fear pressed against her chest, heavy, suffocating. She didn't sleep that night. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound in the apartment a warning. But she didn't call Elias. Not yet. Not while she tried to protect him from the weight she carried alone. Days passed. She smiled. She worked. She let Lila twirl and chatter, pretending the ground hadn't opened beneath her feet. But Elias noticed. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her laugh, the way her eyes no longer met his across the lobby. He waited. He didn't ask at first. He didn't push. Then one late afternoon, passing the quiet hotel courtyard, he saw her alone, seated on a bench, face buried in her hands. Her shoulders trembled with silent sobs, and for a long moment, he simply watched. Then he walked over, quietly, without fanfare. He sat beside her, offering a handkerchief and a bottle of water. Clara looked up, startled. Her mascara had smudged. Her eyes were red-rimmed and tired. "I'm fine," she said automatically, brushing at her cheeks. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't speak immediately. He simply sat there, solid, steady, present. "You don't have to be," he said softly, voice low but unwavering. "Not here. Not with me." The words settled over her like a blanket, easing the weight just enough for her to breathe. She clutched the water, blinking away tears. For the first time since she'd opened that envelope, she realized she wasn't alone. That night, Elias made a few calls. By morning, a lawyer appeared at Clara's door, calm, professional, and unmistakably prepared. "You owe nothing," the attorney said. "You have someone in your corner." Clara's eyes widened. She didn't need to ask who had sent her this help. She already knew, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. Someone had chosen to stand beside her, not to fix her life, not to take control, but to simply protect her while she fought. The quiet days didn't last forever. One Thursday afternoon, the storm arrived, not in the sky, but at Clara's doorstep. She had been running the hotel lobby on her own, Lila in tow, juggling deliveries and guests, when a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. She opened the door to find a courier holding a thick envelope stamped with a law firm's logo. Her hands froze before they even reached for it. Inside were pages of legal language, formal and cold, each word heavier than the last. It was a petition, custody, visitation, demands that Clara had hoped never to see again. Callan Price, the man who had walked out years ago, leaving promises behind like broken glass, had returned. A note slipped between the papers, made her stomach twist. Take the settlement, walk away, or see you in court. Lila was napping in the next room, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond the door. Clara sank into the kitchen chair, her hands trembling. the paper shaking in rhythm with her heartbeat. Fear pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't lift, a cold wave threatening to drag her under. She didn't call Elias immediately. Not yet. She wasn't ready to share this burden. Not while she tried to keep Lila safe. Her life steady despite the threat. She told herself she could handle it. She had to, but Elias noticed. The next morning, when he arrived at the hotel lobby, he saw the subtle signs. Her stiff posture, the tightness in her laugh, the way her hands trembled when she poured coffee. He didn't ask. Not yet. He just watched, silently, carefully. Later, passing the hotel courtyard, he saw her alone on a bench. Her face was buried in her hands, shoulders trembling with silent sobs. She thought she was unseen, but he was there, always. He walked over without a word, quiet footsteps on the cobblestones. He sat beside her, offering a handkerchief and a bottle of water. She looked up, startled, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. I'm fine, she said automatically, but Elias didn't flinch. He didn't speak immediately. He simply sat there, solid, unwavering. You don't have to be, he said softly, voice low, steady. Not here, not with me. The words fell gently, a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. She clutched the water, blinking back tears, letting herself breathe a fraction easier. For the first time since opening that envelope, she felt a flicker of hope. That evening, Elias made a few discreet calls. By the next morning, a lawyer arrived at Clara's door, professional, calm, prepared. You owe nothing, the attorney said. You have someone in your corner. Clara didn't need to ask who had sent her this help. She already knew. And in that moment, the storm, so fierce, so terrifying, felt a little less overwhelming. There was someone standing beside her. Someone who hadn't promised to fix everything, but had promised to stand there while she fought. And in that quiet presence, Clara felt a shift. The storm hadn't passed completely, but the weight was shared now, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel quite so alone. By the time Friday evening arrived, the air had a crisp edge, the sky painted in muted shades of twilight. Clara had spent the day moving to the motions of work and motherhood, but the tension from the storm of legal papers still clung to her like a shadow. Lila was asleep in her favorite armchair, a blanket tucked over a small frame, her soft breaths rising and falling in rhythm. Clara sat nearby, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, staring out the window at the city lights, wondering how she would navigate the coming weeks. The weight on her shoulders was almost unbearable. Then the doorbell rang. Elias was standing there, calm, composed, holding a small package. His suit was immaculate. The familiar sharpness of his presence softened by something warmer, gentler. Clara blinked, unsure she could find her voice. I brought something, he said quietly, almost cautiously, as if the act itself required permission. Inside the package was a small, handcrafted toy chest. Simple, elegant, yet carefully filled with little treasures, handmade toys, storybooks, a few cookies wrapped in parchment, and a note in Elias's familiar, neat handwriting. For the bravest girl I know, and the strongest woman who keeps her safe. Clara's chest tightened. She didn't speak. Her hands hovered over the package, trembling slightly as she realized the weight behind it. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about grandeur. It was about thoughtfulness, care, presence. Elias knelt beside Lila's chair, carefully placing the chest where the girl could see it first thing in the morning. He didn't try to impress. He didn't make a spectacle. He simply acted, thoughtfully, deliberately. Clara's eyes followed him as he stood and turned toward her. I can't fix everything, he said softly, voice low but steady. But I can stand beside you. Always. The words weren't loud. They weren't a dramatic vow. They didn't need to be. They carried a weight that no courtroom, no letter, no threat could ever match. Clara felt a tear escape, tracing her cheek as she blinked, trying to compose herself. She realized in that moment how much she had been holding back. Not just fear, but hope, doubt, the yearning for someone to truly see her. And here he was, seeing her in a way no one else had. She took a hesitant step closer. Elias's eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. Without a word, she reached out. Their hands brushed, then held, gently, Deliberately, a touch that carried trust, understanding, and something far deeper than either had allowed themselves to name. The city outside continued its rhythm, lights flickering, cars moving in quiet constellations. But inside that apartment, the air had shifted. Something fragile, delicate, and yet unbreakably real had begun to form, a bond rooted not in grand declarations, but in steady presence, shared care, and the quiet courage to be there for one another. Elias smiled faintly, a softness in his eyes that had been reserved for few, and Clara returned it, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken promise between them. And then he turned slightly, looking toward the sleeping Lila, lifting her gently into his arms, cradling her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Clara followed, walking beside him, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Words weren't necessary. The act itself, the shared care, the protection, the silent, unwavering presence, spoke louder than any speech, any gesture, any promise could. Outside, the street lamps flickered on, casting soft amber light over the trio. Elias adjusted his coat over Lila, and Clara brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. For the first time, the weight of fear and loneliness didn't feel so suffocating. For the first time, the three of them, man, mother, child, felt like a quiet, steady family, rooted not in circumstance, but in choice, in care, in the simple decision to stay. And in that moment, Clara realized something profound. Sometimes, the grandest gestures aren't shouted from rooftops. Sometimes, they arrive in the quiet, in the thoughtful, in the unwavering presence of someone who chooses to be there, even when the world is loud and threatening. For Clara, for Lila, for Elias, the storm had passed. What remained was steadiness, trust, and the promise of something enduring. Not perfection, not flawless lives, but love. A love that had started small, grown quietly, and now held them all, gently, completely, together. The first rays of dawn crept through the hotel lobby's tall windows, scattering golden light across polished floors and the faint scent of fresh coffee. Clara was there, quietly arranging Lila's little backpack, her hands moving with familiar rhythm, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. Elias sat at a corner table, his usual calm presence blending into the morning bustle, but something about him had changed. He wasn't just a stranger passing through her life anymore. He had become a quiet, steady part of it, a presence that no longer intimidated or unsettled, but reassured. Lila's laughter echoed through the lobby as she scampered toward them, her tiny feet pattering across the tiles. She carried her favorite book, the one with the soft cover, and the pages filled with colors and dreams. Her eyes met Elias's, and without hesitation, she ran into his arms, wrapping her small arms around him in a hug that spoke volumes. "You're my favorite grown-up," she said, her voice sleepy but earnest. Elias's lips twitched into a smile, a mixture of surprise and warmth as he held her gently. Clara watched, her chest tightening with emotion. She realized in that simple moment that the love she had feared she couldn't have, the stability, the care, the feeling of being truly seen, was not just possible. It was here, in the laughter of a child, in the steady hands of the man who had quietly chosen to be there, in the shared moments of care and protection. Elias set Lila down carefully, brushing her hair back from her face, and looked at Clara. "We're okay," he said softly, almost more to himself than to her. But Clara heard it as a promise, a recognition of what they had survived, and what they could now begin to build together. The hotel lobby, once a place of solitude and echoes, felt warm and alive. Guests came and went, unaware of quiet miracle unfolding in that corner, of the little family beginning to take shape. The polished floors reflected the sunlight, casting a gentle glow over the trio as they moved through the space together. Lila skipping ahead, Clara adjusting her bag, Elias's hand brushing against hers in a touch that spoke without words. Later, they stepped out onto the streets, the city alive with the hum of morning traffic and distant chatter. Autumn leaves swirled in soft gusts of wind, golden and crimson, as if the world itself were celebrating the small, steady miracle of their new beginning. Lila pointed at the trees, giggling as the leaves danced past, and Clara found herself laughing too, a full, unrestrained laugh that had been buried under months of worry and fear. Elias held Lila's hand in one and Clara's in the other, walking slowly, deliberately, allowing the rhythm of their steps to sync with the quiet pulse of the city around them. It wasn't grandiose. There were no flashy gestures, no dramatic declarations, just presence, just choice, just the simple, profound act of being there for one another. As they returned to the hotel, the familiar lobby bathed in morning light, Clara realized that life would never be perfect. There would still be challenges, moments of fear, days when the weight of responsibility pressed down. But now, she didn't have to carry it alone. She had Elias. She had Lila. And together, they had something stronger than fear, steadiness, trust, and the quiet certainty that some people, some love, simply stay. They passed the reception desk, where the concierge gave them a warm smile, unaware of the small, powerful transformation happening in the hearts of three who moved past. Clara glanced at Elias, a smile tugging at her lips, soft but real. He met her gaze, and in that look, there was no need for words. Everything important had already been said in actions, in glances, in the silent promise to remain. Lila yawned, leaning against Clara, her tiny hand resting in Elias's. Together, they walked toward the elevator, the hum of the city below carrying them forward. It wasn't just a morning. It wasn't just a moment. It was the start of a life rebuilt, one small act of courage, one gentle gesture at a time. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes, it simply begins quietly. Sometimes, it is found in the presence of someone who sees you, in the kindness of a hand that reaches out when the world feels too heavy, in the laughter of a child who reminds you why it's worth trying again. And in that soft, golden morning light, Clara, Lila, and Elias stepped into a future they had earned, not perfect, not easy, but theirs. Together, the world outside continued its rush, but inside that small circle of warmth and trust, the storm had passed, the shadows had lifted, and for the first time in years, they all felt like they were home. Sometimes, the smallest moments leave the biggest marks. A kind word, a gentle gesture, a hand extended when no one else is looking. These are the things that remind us we are not alone. Life can feel heavy, but even in quiet, lonely spaces, connection can appear in the most unexpected ways. A stranger who notices, a child who asks the question no one else remembers. Remember, home isn't always a place. It's the people who stay, who care, who offer their hearts without condition. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV and tap the bell for more stories of love, hope, and healing. Keep your eyes open, your heart soft, and your hands ready to give and receive kindness, because sometimes one small gesture changes everything.